Hi, my people. It's me again. Did you miss me? Jan Broberg. So much to this story. And from beginning to end, insane. To the point that I've talked about this story multiple times. I've talked about it over on TikTok. There's so many documentaries and podcast episodes and YouTube videos and all the things about this story because it's that crazy. And in one of the documentaries, I'll have to look where it is. I think maybe Netflix. Jan herself and her parents and her sisters talk in that documentary. So the source of this story is literally coming from Jan herself. Yet every single time I think about it or talk about it, I'm like, is this real? Like, are we sure that this really happened? Because it's so insane. But in the same breath, I'm like, well, no, this had to have happened because never in someone's wildest dreams would they come up with this story. It's not something that you would even think about. So here we go. I would just leave the intro at this. Just when you think you know, you don't know. Welcome to this week's episode of I Wish You Were Here. My name is Michelle and I'm your host. Jan Broberg, she was the oldest of three children to her parents, Mary Ann and Robert Broberg. She also had two little sisters called Karen and Susan, but her parents have said that ever since Jan was little, she was like a firecracker, a little bundle of joy, but with so much energy. She always wanted to play. She always wanted to hang out with people. She always wanted to do something. Being bored for Jan was never really an option, even as a little girl. She always found different things to do, different things to try out, different people in her neighborhood to play with. And her personality very much gave older sister as well. And coming from a family of three girls, I'm the middle child, but I have an older and a younger sister. I feel like I can picture the three girls in her family growing up together and what that must have been like, because they all described themselves as being very, very close with each other. They were together all the time, and I'm sure it was so much fun. I mean, they have all described their childhood to be the best of the best, the ideal childhood that people only hope to have. So safe to say that the three of them really had so much fun growing up together, and it's a shame that what ended up happening did, especially because it was from someone that they all trusted, someone that they all grew to know and love. Jan herself has been quoted saying, quote, "I had a wonderful childhood until I was 12. My parents, we ate dinner together, we talked about everything, we were loved unconditionally," end quote. Her father, Robert, who went by Bob, he worked as a florist. He had owned his own flower shop for about 40 years, which isn't that the most wholesome job that you can think of? Like, how sweet, a little flower shop. He loved what he did, which is amazing. And her mother, Mary Ann, she was a stay-at-home mom. The Brobergs were raised Mormons, and that was a really big part of their lives. They belonged to the LDS church, and they were all very involved in not only the church, but they were also really active in their community. And by the way, this story takes place in the 1970s, so to fully understand the setting that we're in, you have to understand and especially remember and keep in mind throughout the entirety of this story that the world then was a completely different world than the world we live in now. Different things, different rules applied. I would say that there wasn't the necessary feeling to be so protected and so aware of your surroundings. You know what I mean? Like, nowadays we hear so many stories that really make you think how important it is, or remind you more so how important it is to be vigilant and aware. But back then, kids were just out on the street. They were being kids. They were playing around. Parents were not locking their doors, and that was normal. So keep that in mind. But the neighborhood that they lived in, it was a very close-knit community. The residents knew each other. They looked out for one another. The children played outside. Families would more oftentimes than not be outside, either just spending time together, enjoying the weather, or going on walks. The kids were either always outside playing with toys, or they were riding their bikes, or they were playing with dirt. All the things, right? You could leave your door locked or unlocked, your windows locked or unlocked, because the families there felt not only so comfortable with one another, but also so connected. They were never concerned or worried. It was such a safe place in their eyes, which is an amazing feeling to have, especially in the place that you live at. It's what someone hopes for. And it wasn't only in the way of, I can leave my doors unlocked because no one will come inside, and I'm not scared of people coming inside. But it was one step further in the way that they felt like their neighbors were always looking out for each other, always looking out for one another. And it was great. You know how people often say it takes a village? The Brobergs had a village. At least that's what it felt like. In June of 1972, Mary Ann, the mom, she was at a church when she noticed a family that she hadn't seen around before. The Birch told family. The father, Robert B., we're going to call him B because that was his nickname. The father, Robert Berchtold, he was there with his wife, Gail, as well as with their 5 children. Marianne walked over, they all introduced each other, and right off the bat, she knew that this was a family that they would likely become friends with. Some of their kids were the same age as some of their daughters. The Berchtold couple had a lot of similarities individually, but also together with the Broberg family. And it was just the perfect recipe for the perfect family friends. They were also all lovely people. That was the first thing that Marianne noticed. She remembers leaving church that day thinking, wow, so glad I met them. The Berchtolds are very, very nice, kind people, excited to welcome them to the community. So they become friends over the years, and naturally, their friendship gets closer and closer. Marianne becomes really good friends with the wife, Gail. Bob Broberg and B, the fathers, they had a lot in common, not only family-wise, but also business-wise, because we know that Bob, he owned a floral shop, and B owned a furniture store, which was only adding on to the similarities that they had. So the 2 of them also grew to be very close. And of course, the kids all found a best friend in each other. They bonded immediately. I mean, kids were just being kids. When you put a group of kids together who are all friendly, kind, and wanting to make new friends, they're going to get along, and they really did. Robert Birch told B, he started coming around more and more often. He would pick up the kids to play, he would give them all rides, he would either take them to his house to hang out, or he would stay over to hang out with them. He would bring his family over. He really grew to love the Brobergs, and they loved him back. Early on in their relationship, him and his wife sent a flower arrangement to Marianne and Bob. They mailed it over to their house with a little card that said, quote, "We sure enjoy your family," signed the Berchtolds. And the Brobergs thought that that was wonderful, so thoughtful of them. And again, it only reassured them that this new family that they were becoming really close friends with were all very good people down to their core. So B was coming around often. He was playing with the children as if they were his own. However, he did particularly pay a little bit more attention to 12-year-old Jan. He even gave her a nickname. He called her Dolly. And B adored Jan as if she was his own. He played with all of the kids, but he always wanted to be close to or touching Jan. He carried around his camera, but he always made sure to take pictures of Jan. He invited all of the kids over to go and play at his house, but he always made sure that Jan would be there. Now, of course, in hindsight, it's so extremely disturbing to know what his real agenda was the entire time. But at the same time, he was doing such a disgustingly good job at pretending that his intentions with the Broberg kids were normal and safe and sweet. When in reality, we know now that B just wanted complete power and control over this weird, disturbing relationship that he was building with Jan. Everything that he did was calculated. Everything that he did was with intentions, those intentions of getting really close to Jan. But in order to get the access that he wanted to Jan, with no suspicions raised, he first had to manipulate her parents. And manipulate her parents he did. Moving forward, things start to get confusing with this story, so just try and follow along because a lot of weird things go on and a lot of weird lives and relationships are intertwined, so just pay attention. In the fall of 1972, so this was 2 years before the abduction, B was at work one day and from his store, he called Marianne. She picks up the phone and B says, "I'm at work, I don't really have time to go out and grab some lunch. How about if you have time, you come down to my store and you bring me a sandwich and then we can eat lunch together?" Marianne agreed. She grabbed some food, she went down there, gave B his food, and Marianne is thinking, this is a new guy in town. Remember, the first impression that she had of him was a big one. She was impressed by this guy. She was intrigued by him. He was very pleasant and charming in her eyes. So when B started flirting with her, she was flustered. Here you have this man, the same age as her husband. He's calling her over to invite her to eat lunch with him. He's putting effort in to hang out with her, to see her. He's giving her compliments, giving her attention, the kind of attention that Marianne had not received from her husband in years since they had been married, at this point around 13 years. That was the day that their relationship turned from friends to more than friends. B would compliment Marianne. He would tell her that she had an amazing body, that she had beautiful legs, a beautiful face, and he showered her with compliments whenever he had the chance to, and Marianne would get giddy. She would get nervous because she found him attractive. Marianne tried, she says. She tried to push the feelings that she was growing for B away because she knew that she was married and this wasn't a right thing to do. She knew that it was wrong for her to start growing this attraction, these feelings towards another man. However, on a trip to Utah for a church event, she just could not push away her feelings any longer. She eventually gave in to B's flirtatious comments. They started kissing some more, they did other things with each other, and her feelings for him only grew to be stronger. Not only that, the trust that she had for him now did as well, because now they had this secret that was just between the two of them, a secret that only they were aware about, and just like that, B now had mental control over Marianne, probably without her even noticing. For Bob Broberg, on the other hand, his relationship with B was a mix of trust, guilt, but also shame. One day, while he was working at his flower shop, B stopped by, very visibly uncomfortable and uneasy. There was something bothering him, and Bob could tell. And then B acknowledged it. He asked Bob if he was busy or if he could get in the car with him and if they could go for a ride to talk about whatever was on his mind, whatever was bothering him. And Bob, being a good friend, got in the car. They went for the drive. They start driving, and B confides in Bob about his marriage, about the relationship between him and his wife, about the issues that they're having, the marital problems. He's trusting Bob as his new close friend, and he wants to talk about the most vulnerable parts of his marriage with him, so he does. B tells him that the attraction between him and his wife isn't really there anymore. Years have passed, it kind of went away, and he tells him that a man has needs and that his wife is not meeting his needs, so he's very sexually frustrated. B tells Bob that he needs help with that. He needs assistance. Bob looks over at B's lower region and he sees something that he cannot ignore. B is very clearly aroused. You can see it from his pants. And he addresses it, and then he asks Bob to give him some relief. And he says this like it's the most casual thing in the world, mind you. Like it's no big deal. Like, hey man, I'm sexually frustrated. Can you please help me? And Bob agrees. Bob agrees to relieve B by touching him. Years later, when describing this incident, Bob has said, quote, "I did the worst thing I've ever done by breaking the trust and fidelity that I had with my wife," end quote. Yeah, isn't that crazy? Both Bob and his wife Marianne have now had some sort of sexual relations with B. Using the sickest, weirdest charm that he knew exactly how to use, B now had something that twisted the trust between him and Bob and turned it more so into some sort of manipulation. B played those parents in a game of twisted truths and lies and twisted trust to gain access to what he really wanted. And what he really wanted was Jan. And he played that game perfectly. October 17th of 1974 was a Thursday. That day, after school hours, B calls the Broberg family house. Marianne picks up the phone, and B tells her that he wants to take Jan horseback riding to a place that was roughly 25 miles away from where they lived. It was a place called American Falls. Marianne initially wasn't really thrilled about the idea. After all, it was a school night. Jan had school the next day. She had things to do. She had a practice to attend to. But when Jan heard that B really wanted to take her, she begged her mom to let her go. So B had called originally to ask if he could take Jan, but eventually he ended up just coming over. He showed up at their house, walked in through the back door, and he told Jan that he wanted to take her to go see the horses. So all three of them are now standing together in person, and Jan says that she really wants to go. B really wants to take her, so Marianne eventually just agrees. She's like, okay, sure, just make sure that you have her home before dinner. They agree that B was going to pick up Jan from her piano lessons and then take her straight horseback riding, and he assured Marianne that he would drop her back home around dinner time. So that was the plan. Jan went off to go to her piano lessons, B picked her up, and then they left. Time passes in the Broberg family house. Bob eventually gets home from work. He's home now. They're getting dinner together, but Jan isn't home yet. Her little sisters are waiting for her to get home to play with her, but she does not come home. And minutes turn into hours, and around 9 p.m., Gail, B's wife, she shows up at the Broberg family household, and she's concerned. So now there's 3 adults wondering what could have happened. They're not thinking the worst yet. They're not thinking anything malicious happened, but they're thinking maybe they're having vehicle issues. Maybe they got stuck at the stables. Maybe they got lost. They took the wrong turn, something like that. Who knows? But what they did know, the Brobergs, was that the man that their daughter was with, it was someone that they trusted. B was like a second father to Jan, and wherever they were, whatever happened, they knew for a fact that Jan was safe because B would make sure of that. He would take care of her. The trust and the confidence that the Brobergs had in B was more than enough to carry them through Saturday morning. By the time they called law enforcement to inform them that they couldn't find their daughter, 3 nights had passed. They had left Thursday night and they did not call until Saturday morning. But when they eventually did call, they realized that the FBI office was closed for the weekend, and now they just accepted that. I mean, I guess they thought, what are we going to do? They didn't necessarily want to call emergency services, so instead, they just waited until Tuesday morning to call the FBI again. 5 days had passed since the last time that they had seen their daughter. FBI Special Agent Pete Welsh got the call on October 22nd of 1974. He spoke to Jan's parents for hours. He sat in their house with them. He was asking them questions about Jan, what she was doing the last time they saw her, who she went with, who this guy was, their family, friend / neighbors. And he was the one person who had to snap the Brobergs back into reality for a bit and help them see the bigger picture, help them realize that their daughter had been kidnapped. Because when Jan's parents called him, they weren't really calling to say, I think our daughter has been kidnapped and we need help immediately. I mean, in itself, the fact that they waited 5 days to call, that in itself was obvious that they weren't really concerned about a kidnapping. It didn't even cross their minds. They were more so calling to say, one of our friends left with our daughters. They haven't been back. 5 days have passed. We're worried about them. We're worried about both of their safeties. We don't think that B has taken her. We don't think that something sinister happened because he would never do anything to hurt her. So they probably just got lost and we really need your help to find them. Pete Welsh had to repeat it to them over and over again. What has happened here? The situation at hand is that your daughter has been kidnapped. This is a kidnapping. He took your daughter. She is gone. You don't know where she is. You haven't heard from them. Robert B. Berchtold has abducted your daughter. He literally had to sit there and spell it out for them to realize what was happening. He had to put effort into cementing this in their brains because they were so far into denial. So he had to tell them, your daughter probably is, in danger. But it was so hard for Jan's parents to accept that as a possibility because in their heads, it just wasn't. It wasn't a thing that they wanted to even think about. It wasn't a thing that B would take their daughter on purpose. It didn't take long, with the help of B's wife, for the FBI to realize that the Berchtold family's motorhome was gone from where they usually kept it. It also didn't take long for them to get a call in reporting an abandoned Ford vehicle left randomly at a state park. It was B's car. The window was shattered. There was something that looked to be like blood on the window, but the way that the window was broken, it was clear that it was broken from the inside out. And it kind of was starting to look like this abandoned car that was kind of staged to be a kidnapping was likely staged. It was something that was done on purpose. It wasn't something that actually happened. At least that's the picture that it was painting. But this was only the start of what would become a nationwide search, and they would not have any answers for 35 days. And it would be during those 35 days that this image that the FBI had of B. Berchtold, which was originally a Pocatello businessman, a business owner, an LDS church member, a loving family man, respected father and friend, that image that they had of him would turn into what it really was. A Pocatello man that had a disturbing fascination with young girls with sick fantasies and desires to set out to fulfill. And this image of him having this weird attraction towards little girls, it was something that even his own brother was willing to confirm. B's brother told the FBI that when B was as young as 12 years old, his behavior was weird, and he behaved weirdly towards his own half-sisters who would have been around 6 years old at the time. His brother always knew that there was something wrong with B, that there was something off about him, and he had no problem expanding on that to the FBI. We later find out that the LDS Church had essentially kicked B out in January because of his involvement with a different little girl. So when Pete Welsh focused in on B, he discovered that his pattern was to brainwash and play these mind control games to gain trust, to get close to, and to get to little girls. In this case, to get to Jan. So where was Jan? Where had B taken her? When he picked her up after her piano lessons the one day that Thursday, under the impression that they were going to go horseback riding, B had handed Jan what he said was allergy medicine. He told her that she needed to take it before they got to the horses, and Jan did. And after swallowing that, she fell asleep almost immediately. She has absolutely no recollection of the car ride, no idea how long they were driving for, no idea where they were driving to. The next thing that Jan knew, she woke up in a pitch black, dark room. She was lying on a bed, and she had her wrists and her ankles tied up. Right next to her, on a little table, was a white box that looked almost like a radio. And from the white box, there was a voice coming out. It was talking to her. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know where she is. She is extremely drowsy, going in and out of sleep. She dozes off. She wakes back up. She's still hearing these voices come out from this little box. And these voices tell Jan that she's been abducted by aliens. The aliens that abducted her are Zeta and Sethra. Zeta and Sethra informed Jan that she herself is part alien, that her mother was her real mother, but that her father was not. Her real father was an alien, and that alien lived in a different planet. She's told that she's on Earth specifically to complete a mission that would save her alien planet where she was really from. And that mission was to have a child by the time that she turned 16 with a male companion. Should Jan fail to complete her mission, the aliens would go after her sister. So 12-year-old Jan has woken up. She's in the dark. She's in a daze. She just came back to. She doesn't know how she got there, but she's being told by the voices in this box, claiming to be aliens, that she has a mission to complete by the time that she turned 16. Aliens Zeta and Sethra tell Jan that she needs to find a male companion to have a baby with him in order to save her planet. And if she doesn't, her little sister was the backup plan. So she's in this motorhome when she looks around and she sees B on the couch next to her in the same room. He looks to be asleep, but as soon as Jan sees him, she realizes that he is the male companion in her mission. He is the male companion that she is supposed to have a baby with. Reminder, she's 12 years old and B is in his 40s. But that's the thing. She's 12 years old. Because listening to this, it's so easy for us to think, what were you thinking? You know, like, how did you believe that? And I'm not saying that what she believed is not completely insane, because it is. It's very insane, in fact. But she's a 12-year-old little girl. She has spent her entire life being read bedtime stories, being made up of stories that sound that crazy, right? Like princesses and dinosaurs and monsters and magic and aliens, all the things. She grew up watching movies like Star Trek, Lost in Space, sci-fi movies where she saw on the screen crazy things taking place. So for a 12-year-old little girl to think that it was possible that she was kidnapped by aliens, it was a plausible thing for Jan. She has been asked how long it took her for her to be brainwashed and to believe what she was being told. And this was her response, quote, 10 seconds. When I first heard the voice in the RV, the planting of the seeds is where all of that nefarious grooming and manipulation happened before that moment. Once that moment happened, I believed it entirely, completely, and I knew aliens were watching me. I really did think that aliens would take my sister if I didn't do the mission. I really believed it, end quote. After processing it for a few minutes, Jan runs over to B, this man who has been basically her second father to her, this man who she loves and she trusts, and she wakes him up. And he tells her that on their drive, they were kidnapped by a UFO. Because remember, Jan has no recollection how they got there. She doesn't know what happened, but thankfully, B was there to clear it up, and B informs her that they were kidnapped by a UFO. And then they start talking about the mission. In reality, where B and Jan was it was in Mexico. And like I said, her family would know nothing about them for 35 days. So November 20th of 1994, 35 days of them being missing, B reaches out to his brother who's back in the States, and he asks him to tell Marianne, Jan's mother, to give him and Jan written permission to come back to the States and get legally married. Because in those 35 days that they had been in Mexico, they had gotten married there which this fact in itself is crazy to believe. Remember, this is in the 70s, but they got married in Mexico because the legal age of consent there was 12 years old. How crazy is that? However, now they want to come home. It's been 35 days. They're ready to come back, and they want Jan's parents' permission for them to get legally married in the United States. Jan's parents think absolutely not. And soon after that phone call, the FBI was able to trace the call, and they were able to figure out that this entire time, Jan and B had been in Mexico. So they go get them. They take them into custody, and when B gets a chance to talk to Jan, he makes sure to tell her that Zeta and Sethra said that she is not allowed to talk about anything at all, or else her family would be harmed. She would be vaporized, she would disappear, and then the aliens would then go after her little sister Susan to complete the mission. Her little sister Karen would also go blind, and her father, remember, this is what the aliens are saying, her father would be removed, aka killed. And that was that. That's all it took for Jan to keep the secret. Bob and Marianne went to Mexico to go pick up Jan, but she was not the same little girl anymore. Jan denied that anything happened. She said that she had been perfectly fine for the last 35 days. All she said was that she had gone on vacation with B. B was also taken back to Idaho, and he was preparing to face some kidnapping charges. That was until his wife, Gail, showed up to the Broberg's family house. Gail basically told Bob that if he did not drop the charges against B, if he didn't drop the case entirely against him, then all of his dirty laundry would be aired, meaning that the romantic and physical relationships that B had with Bob would come out. And Marianne, Bob's wife, who was shocked to hear this, by the way, because she has also been involved with B romantically, but they had no idea about that. She couldn't have any of her dirty laundry come out, and neither could Bob. They couldn't have that happen. So they ended up dropping the charges, and they willingly signed an affidavit that said, quote, "My daughter was not taken by force or against her will, nor was she held or confined against her will at any time," end quote. Yup. They just dropped the kidnapping charges because they wanted to save face, because they didn't want their filthy secrets coming out. I don't know if they just cared more about their reputation than they did about their daughter's literal well-being, but that's what they did. And just like that, B. Berchtold is now off the hook for quite literally kidnapping a 12-year-old girl, taking her to Mexico, and marrying her. The FBI, though, obviously they had been leading this entire investigation, and they refused to let it go, as any normal person would, because what do you mean that you just want to brush this under the rug and forget about it? The FBI was like, no, we want to keep this going. They wanted to take this to trial, so they did. However, B was only sentenced for 45 days because Bob and Marianne dropped the charges, meaning that the FBI now had 0 witnesses to testify in court. Now get this. B, in his sick head, still wants to go to get Jan so he can continue his sick fantasies. All he wanted to do was come back home, which is why he made that phone call, but he wasn't done. He wasn't ready to let Jan go. He wanted more. So what does B do to manipulate his way into the Broberg family again? He makes Marianne his target. He manipulates Marianne, Jan's mom, into having a romantic, intimate relationship with him for the next 8 months. Yeah. This woman's daughter has been kidnapped. She has been taken advantage of, and her mother has now entered into a secret 8-month romantic relationship with him, with her daughter's kidnapper, after dropping the charges. What do you mean? Jan, on the other hand, meanwhile, she's still worried about B and about this mission that they had to complete. She was still terrified that if she didn't complete it, the aliens would go after her little sister. So she's worried. She's kind of living in fear. She ends up returning to school and she keeps living her life as normal as she can, but she is definitely more guarded, more closed off nowadays. And B continues to secretly try to contact Jan. He begins secretly sending her letters. He's sneaking around to try and arrange times for them to meet in secret to be able to keep pursuing this mission of trying to have a baby together. He would write her love letters about how much he loved her and adored her. He would sneak into her bedroom at night with the little alien box so that Jan could still talk to Zeta and Sethra so she wouldn't forget about this mission. Jan also herself would write letters back to B about how much she missed him and loved him and wanted to marry him. A complete case of Stockholm Syndrome, by the way. If you don't know what that is, it's when a person that's being held captive or is in danger, it's when a victim develops either emotional attachment, sympathy, or sometimes even loyalty toward the person that is putting them in harm's way. And that, like, to me, when I read about this case, I'm like, yeah, 100% that's what Jan had, because she trusted B and she loved him and she had no idea or didn't realize that what was happening to her was so incredibly messed up on every single level. She felt this loyalty towards him. Between 1975 and 1976, B. Berchtold was having physical encounters with both Jan and her mother, convincing them both that he was in love with them both and that he wanted to live with them and be with them forever. I kind of worded that weird. He wasn't obviously they were not aware that he was doing this to the both of them, but he was behind their backs. When Marianne's husband, Bob, found out, he filed for divorce. Obviously, I mean, well, not to disregard that he also had relations with B, but I guess that was a breaking point for him and he didn't want to be in this marriage any longer. And it took a little while for Marianne, but she eventually ended up asking for forgiveness and she said that she didn't want to get a divorce, that she wanted to stay in her marriage, and Bob ended up forgiving her. Then in 1976, B gets up and he moves to Wyoming, leaving his wife Gail and his 5 kids, leaving behind his family and moving away, although he did make it a point to come back and visit his family often. By this point, 2 years have passed since the kidnapping, and Jan begs her mother Marianne and her father Bob to let her go to Wyoming for the summer. She wanted to work with B. She wanted to be with B for the summer. Jan threatened to run away if her parents did not let her go, so her mom let her go. And Jan left to go and live in Wyoming with B for 2 weeks. When she returned to Idaho, she was miserable. She was so completely and utterly brainwashed by B that she wanted to be right next to him every single day at all times. She didn't care to be in Idaho anymore, even though her best friends, her sisters, her entire family was there. All Jan wanted was to go and be with B. On August 10th of 1976, Jan Broberg disappeared for the second time. She left a note in her bedroom saying that she ran away to go be with B and she wouldn't come back until her parents agreed to let her be with B. But what actually happened was that she was taken from her bedroom by B. Berchtold. But after talking about it, they decided that the story that they were going to put together, the story they agreed to tell, was to pretend that they were not together. So throughout the time that Jan was away, B would call the Broberg family house phone often, asking if they had heard from Jan, asking if they had any updates of where she could be. The Broberg family waited for 2 weeks to call authorities again to report Jan missing again. And as soon as Agent Welsh heard, he was like, "Are you being serious? Like, WTF? This has happened before. Obviously, B has her again." Fast forward to November 11th of 1976, Jan has been gone for 102 days. They were able to find, throughout this time, the FBI is continuing their investigation, right? They're trying to look for them. They were able to find B's motorhome in a trailer park. However, Jan was not inside. He wasn't either. But what was inside were many, many poster-sized pictures of Jan taped on the walls all around the trailer. What a harrowing thought that is. Eventually, by tracing phone calls made from B, they were able to trace down the payphone, and investigators discovered that he obviously did know where Jan was, and in fact, he had enrolled her into an all-girls Catholic school in California. The lie that they had been living under for the past 100 days was that B was an undercover CIA agent whose wife had passed and that Jan was his daughter. And he was claiming that he needed to protect the identities of both himself and his daughters, making it very, very clear to anyone they met, but especially to the school, that under no circumstances could anyone find out about their real identities because that would only put him and his daughter in danger. So when the FBI found this out, they called the school and they asked about Jan Broberg. And the school just said, no, we don't have anyone by that name. But they only said that because they've been told by B that they had to protect their identities. Eventually, they figured out that they did have the right school and that Jan was registered in the school under a fake name, the name Jan Tobler. Jan was picked up. She was sent back home. She was forced on the plane to get sent back to Idaho. But when she got there, well, first, before she got home, she had to go through some questioning before authorities drove her back home. And when she did, she was not happy about being home. She was so upset that her parents had spent so much time looking for her and so upset that they had found her, to the point that when she actually got home after not seeing her parents for an incredibly long amount of time, she didn't even acknowledge them. She got dropped off. She walked through the front door, stormed over to her bedroom, and slammed the door shut. Looking back now, she realized how brainwashed she was, but at the time, it felt like her entire world was crushing down because of her parents. She didn't want to talk to her mom. She didn't even want to think about talking to her dad. And even her sisters felt like they didn't even recognize the person who she was anymore. They didn't recognize Jan. Every part of her that made her Jan had been destroyed. Coming home after the second kidnapping was one of the most stressful and uncomfortable times for the Broberg family. It was distressing, and you can feel the tension in the air in that household. B, he was arrested and he was charged with first-degree kidnapping as well as other charges. And get this, this guy, he just doesn't stop. While B was in jail, he paid two men to burn down Broberger's flower shop. They burned it down to the ground. They actually burnt the entire block to the ground. His 40-year-old business completely ruined. 38 days into Jan being home, Bob got a frantic call in the middle of the night from an employer saying that his store was on fire. And when he got there and he saw it, he had no doubts that he knew who it was who did this. It was B. Of course it was. It was B behind this. Bob knew that B had hated him for a long, long time for being Jan's father, for having the access to Jan that B weirdly craved so much. B was subsequently found not guilty due to mental illnesses, and he was sentenced to a few months in a psychiatric facility. And in 2005, B. Birchtold unalived himself before he could serve any kind of jail sentence. It wouldn't be until Jan turned 16 years old that she realized that the alien story and the mission and the kidnapping and the alien planet, she realized that none of that was true. Reality snapped back into her when she turned 16 and nothing happened, because the aliens, Zeta and Sethra, had told her that she needed to complete this mission before she turned 18. But then she did, and she wasn't vaporized. Her father didn't die. Her sister didn't go blind. And that is when everything sunk in for her. And that is also when she finally built up the courage to tell her parents everything. Jan went through so much trauma and so much healing. It took her so long to realize that she had been a victim. And she experienced so many struggles for her to work through everything that she had been through and realized that everything that happened to her was wrong. Eventually, she was able to gain some sort of closure, and she was able to rebuild all of the relationships with her family that she had either once lost or just completely broken. Since then, her and her mom have written books. They have spoken in public. Obviously, there's been the documentaries, and this story has been also talked about on different podcasts and all sorts of stuff about it. But it's hard to believe that it's not just a story, because all of these people lived through it and it was their real life for years. That is all I have for today's story. Let me know your thoughts on the story. Let me know if you've heard of this before. And yeah, I will see you in next week's episode. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of I Wish You Were Here. As a reminder, you can listen to this podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Video version is also available on YouTube. Love you.